Welcome to the podcast today. Mondo Gonzales here with Gary Stearman. How are you, Gary?
Just fine, Mondo. And we live in a world that gives us a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the Prophecy Watchers podcast. We encourage you to subscribe. Check us out as well on Facebook. I also want to remind people, Gary, we have coming up here pretty soon, the Watchers Weekend, our prophecy conference in Norman, Oklahoma in October. And so if you are interested in coming down and seeing us, that'd be awesome. Go to watchersweekend.com, get all the information. We got over 20 solid speakers that are coming to give us the update and to help us to see how close Jesus' return is.
And you know, a lot will happen between now and then that we will be speaking about in depth from a biblical perspective.
You know, that's the key, I think, Gary, is that, there's a lot of opinions out there, and I have some, and I know you have some, but the goal with the podcast is not to so much give our opinions. I mean, we're trying to give, connections with what we see in the news, but it's to get the scripture out, and it's to talk about what God is saying as it relates to looking through the lens of scripture and assessing what we're seeing in the world today. Let me give you a little example. I was talking to my sister this past few days, and my sister has not read the Bible her whole life. She just hasn't. So she's not entrenched in the biblical framework. So I asked her. I said, "Hey, I want to ask you a question." I said, "I live this every day." I go, "I'm watching the news. I've been studying prophecy for 30 years, but for you, you're not in this every single day." I go, "What do you think about the world?" And she's like, "Oh man, it seems like it's going crazy." And I go, "No, really. What do you see?" And she goes, "Well, I see all the division. I see the racial division. I see the politics are bad. I see all the hate and all the craziness going out there." So here she is, someone that's not entrenched in it like we are, but yet she ultimately said, "You'd have to be blind not to see it." Now, she doesn't have all the answers necessarily. That was kind of my goal in general, is talking to her and say, "Hey, this is what the Bible said," and to help her see that the Bible has said. And here's the question, Gary: has the Bible said? Did it make a prediction that in the end, that the world would descend into relative chaos, not just morally, socially, politically, even environmentally as it relates to earthquakes and stuff? I mean, we're not ending on a everything's rosy Mayberry sunshine mentality, right?
Yeah, and there is a very famous verse in the Bible that talks about in the last days perilous times shall come. And that word perilous, I know you've done a lot of study on it. I've done study on that word. And the Greek word indicates a kind of rage, what I've come to call raging insanity.
Raging insanity.
And that exactly catches what's happening today. Raging insanity in that people are standing up on mass programming on television and making statements that 10 years ago you would never make. Things have happened, Mondo, in a hurry, and it's a little bit frightening.
I want to read, since you mentioned that, I'll just read it. I have it open here for a different reason, but 2 Timothy 3, verse 1, I mean, Paul's writing this, in probably the 60s AD, so a long time ago. He says, "But understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty," or perilous times of raging insanity. That's a good modern translation. "For people," so he switches, okay? He switches to describe what people will be like in those days. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. They have the appearance of godliness, but they deny its power. Avoid such people. I think, Gary, for those listening, he ends it on having the appearance of godliness. There are those that think they might be Christian. There are those that think they might be following God. There are those that, they kind of dabble within spirituality or religious. If people are not sold out 100% to Jesus and by faith and trusting in him for their salvation alone, and they don't reflect that in their lifestyle, when the rapture comes, they're going to be left behind.
Indeed. And that list of characteristics, of social characteristics that you just read off, Paul wrote that list, divinely inspired, and little did Paul know that he was writing about what you see on television. I imagine that the Apostle Paul, if he could know what we were going to be doing in our era, would have been appalled. Because you flip on television, and I'm thinking about the various news channels, and you watch what happens in the New York subway system, and you watch what's happening in Los Angeles and San Francisco, and the streets of San Francisco, and the mass ingestion of free drugs. Yeah, come on by. We'll give you some drugs. You go back to your tent on the street and take some drugs. And meanwhile, people are stealing cars. They're setting fire, burning whole cities. And what you read in the Bible is coming to pass.